Antiquity Unveiled, the most marvelous revelations of the 19th century concerning the origin of Christianity. Marcion, the father of Christianity. I'd rather say that about Paul, but I salute you, sir. For my own benefit and personal aggrandizement, I brought to Rome the Pauline epistles. I obtained them in Antioch. I changed or interpolated them to suit myself, because being a scholar, and understanding those epistles to contain facts that were not known by the world at large, I thought that they presented a rare opportunity to make myself great. These epistles were written or copied from the originals by Apollonius, Apollos, or Paulus, and in order to disguise the identity of their author, Apollonius of Tyana, I interpolated that description of Paul that was afterwards copied by Lucian. The principal foundation of those epistles was the sign of the zodiac known as Aries, the ram or lamb. The early Christians, as will be proven by one who comes after me, today, Lucian, all worshipped a lamb instead of a man on a cross. And, before that, it was the Taurian age, and it was the and before that it was the lion hunt, and before that it was the buffalo, and it changes from time. And maybe at one point they all ate crab. Well, no, not all of them. Too far from the sea for most people. Instead of a man on the cross. Those epistles were written in the Cappadocian or Samaritan tongue. It is my duty as a spirit here today to state positively that I was the first person to introduce these epistles to public notice in 130 of the Common Era, and in the matter I have described, this communication is given for the benefit of all thinkers who wish to be enlightened upon the truth. I was a native of Cappadocia, the country of Apollonius of Tyana, and my name was Marcion. Now, okay, the 80 thing, if he was trying to correct himself, he would have definitely said, no, I'm not going to say year of my Lord anymore. And he could have been one who altered them. But this is not historically thing, so it's either a lying spirit or a medium who's just trying to fill in the blanks. Well, let's have this, you're hanging out with these people, you have your discussions, you do your private research, it's all explained by that sort of thing. Oh, and remember that cardinal Earth in this age, not cardinal fire, because it's the age of Aquarius. Cardinal Earth is Aries in May, and in September the lion is turned green. So the mature of the lamb or ram is the lion. Refer to the works of Dr. Lardner for account of Marcion. Who can read the analysis of the theological labors of Marcion by Dr. Lardner in the light of spirit communication of Marcion, and fail to recognize its complete demonstration that the epistles attributed to St. Paul by the Christians were nothing more or less than certain epistles of Apollonius of Tyana, found some 32 years after his death at Antioch by Marcion, who copied them. Marcion, he making such an alterations as would conceal the original authorship and object that they were taken by him to Rome about 130 of the Common Era. He hoped to become the head of the Christian Church by establishing a new canonical scripture. Now, Mark, yeah, it does appear around that time, the book of Mark. So this very well, Marcion Could very well be it. Markios would be the would be the Greek, wouldn't it? And he certainly would have known, both in life and in the afterlife, that this procession of the equinoxes, looking at the different, oh, we're going to worship this now, and 2,000 years we'll worship something else, and 2,000 something years we'll worship something else, and yeah, it's not everyone. The Spirit testifies positively that he was the first to introduce those writings to the public, and this fact seems to be amply sustained by indisputable historical evidence. According to Dr. Lardner, Marcion rejected 3 Gospels of the Christians, Acts of the Apostles, and other books now claimed to be canonical. Okay. So we're not talking the same Mark, or maybe we are. This is simply absurd. Those books were then not in existence. Well, Luke, Matthew was started. Luke was later, I think, was the latest to be started, so that was afterwards. But John definitely had a Christian version by that time. It's simply absurd those books were not then in existence. The probability is that Apollonius had never made public these writings, and as they were written in the Samaritan tongue, as Apollonius, Ulfilas, Hegesippus, and other spirits have stated, they were not available to the Greek and Latin scholars at that time. Nothing was more natural than an educated and influential Cappadocian whose native language was the Samaritan tongue should have founded these writings of Apollonius in Antioch after the death of that great medium, oracle, and prophet, and copied or translated them from the Samaritan into the Greek and Latin tongues, with both of which languages he was familiar as with his own. But we have these matters set perfectly at rest by the priceless researches of our countryman, M. Charles B. Waite, in his History of the Christian Religion in 200 of the Common Era. This fearless and indefatigable searcher for truth has shown beyond all question that the Gospel of Marcion is the original from which the 4 canonical Christian Gospels have been fabricated by a Christian plagiarist. Now, as I said, I forget exactly how many years, but 400 something before John in the 90s was a book about Bacchus, which is pretty much the same as that 19 chapter thing. Like 95% the same. I mean, literally, just Jesus, Bacchus, a few minor details, and that's it. It's the same book. Of course, I don't think the book about Bacchus was divided into 19 chapters, but we will therefore refer our readers to his invaluable labors in order to prove the importance and truthfulness of that startling communication from Marcion, entitled by Christian writers St. Mark. I ask the reader whether, in light of the spirit communication from the spirit of Marcion, that there can be any longer be a question that there was a Gospel of Paul, and that the writer of it was none other than Apollonius of Tyana. This Gospel of Paul was a Samaritan version of the Sanskrit Gospel, or Gospels of Deva Bodhisattva, obtained at Singapore by Apollonius and modified by him in accordance with his philosophic views. It was this Buddhistic Gospel of Apollonius that was still further modified by Marcion in his Gospel, which he took to and preached at Rome. It was still further modified by some writer 30 years afterwards and labeled the Gospel according to St. Luke, the author of the Gospel of Marcion, the Gospel of Luke, and the Pauline epistles being one and the same person, and that person none other than Apollonius of Tyana, the only Apollos, or Paul, that ever had an existence. This shows the absolute truth of the spirit communication, for Marcion had propagated his New Testament in Pontus before going to Rome, and at least 20 years before Justin wrote. In speaking of the loss or destruction of evidence, Mr. Waite speaks of the writings of Marcion in the following just and forcible manner, which we cannot refrain from quoting in this connection. Well, the message being true is different from the process being true, isn't it? Pure Christianity has suffered no greater loss than that of the writings of Marcion, the great theological thinker of the 2nd century, the compiler of the first complete gospel, the collector of the epistles of Paul, and the editor and publisher of the first New Testament, while the elaborate work against him written by Tertullian, who called him a hound, has been preserved, and the work of Epiphanius, who bestowed upon him the euphonious appellation of beast. 666 is Therion, as in beast, for beast man, Therianthropos. The former, a type of religion that was existing for 17,000 years. You had the same 6-animal compilation as the... Anyways, the writings of Marcion have perished, except such as are found in the references and citations of his adversaries. His works have shared the common fate of those of the heretics of the 2nd century, none of which, in their original form, have been permitted to come down to us. Marcion was an educated man and a profound thinker, and no relic of Christian antiquity, next to the epistles of Paul, would today be more valuable than his writings. Being himself a collector of Gospel and New Testament manuscripts, his writings upon those subjects would forever set at rest the question as to what Gospels were then in circulation. Can there be doubt any longer as to what the Gospel of Marcion was, in view of all the facts of the case? Through an unlettered man who never heard of Marcion, a communication is given which makes known the fact that Paul of the Christian Scriptures was Apollonius of Tyana, and that the so-called Pauline epistles were the writings of that Cappadocian sage, written in the Sumerian tongue, and by himself procured and translated into Greek. Mr. Waite has demonstrated that the writer of Marcion's Gospel, the Gospel of Luke, and the Pauline epistles were one and the same person. Can you doubt that Apollonius of Tyana was that author? If you do, then what is yet to doubt? And now in hand will settle that point beyond doubt. And, okay, Lucian is the next one. But if there's prophet that's inspired or, has revelation, which is an even more direct form of the words, you think things would be preserved, at least to the point of them remaining in the same language. That's not the case with any of the so-called New Testament texts, unless you state that, Paul speaking in Greek. But again, there was a character, an unknown. Apollonius was known, a character that was, reworking his work, and that character was unknown at the time, and Apollonius faded from history as far as a common mention, and Marcion and some others did their thing, and let's put this all in Greek, and they really did edit a lot of the text, and who knows what we lost.